What's going on, everyone? I'm just a standard American here today to react and learn about the history of Great Britain. Now, I realize I've been reacting to a lot of United Kingdom and British culture and some of the politics, some of the historical places about royalty, and I realized I haven't learned anything about where, the British Empire came from, which is why I kind of selected this video in particular about the early British Empire. I think this video starts with how the British Empire was created all the way up till the American Revolution, which thankfully, I am familiar with that at the very least. I don't know I don't know much, but I at least know the part of this whole story that affected America. So actually, I'm shocked when I try to think about it that I really can't say I know much about Great Britain or the United Kingdom in terms of where it came from, how it was formed, the different countries that comprise it, and how they all came together. So many things. I just kind of took it for granted that it existed, like as if it's always existed. Like, it's just funny that it took till now for me to realize, but I'm here to rectify that. And that starts with watching this video.
1497 and the British Empire didn't exist, neither did Britain.
Okay, so we're talking just over 500 years ago to set the stage.
England was the largest and most powerful country in the British Isles at this exist. Neither did Britain. England was the largest and most powerful country in the British Isles at this time.
I realized I wasn't sure how this was going to go, but I see now England at the beginning of this story already exists. So maybe there's a whole other, and Wales and Scotland and Ireland, I assume. So maybe there's other videos I'm going to have to watch about the history of England, how that was formed, and all the other nations that comprise the United Kingdom and Great Britain. But I think this is good for just focusing on the early British Empire.
Wales, the Isle of Man, and a piece of Ireland called the Pale were firmly under English control. The rest of Ireland was mostly independent, only giving lip service to the English monarchy, and in the north, Scotland remained independent and a close ally of France.
Okay, so we have England already established about 500 years ago, already sort of ruling over Wales and Ireland. Actually, I didn't catch that.
Called the Pale were firmly under English control. The rest of Ireland was mostly independent, only giving lip service to the English monarchy, and in the north, Scotland remained independent and a close ally of France.
And at this time, Scotland was still independent. Okay.
King Henry VII of England wished to improve England's trading situation. The English were not exactly renowned.
I'm sorry, but look at these little drawings. I actually don't mind that. Makes everything really simple, huh? Everybody's just a block. We're all just a square here. Okay, I can live with that.
Sailors at this point, and so Henry did what everyone else did at the time, hired an Italian, a certain Giovanni Caboto. Caboto was searching for a northern route to China, but landed in North America, becoming the first European to set foot there, at least since the Vikings had 500 years earlier. Henry VII continued the long tradition of English monarchs and died before being succeeded by...
What does that mean? Is he saying that, is he just making a joke that everybody eventually dies, or did English monarchs have a habit of dying early or dying in under unusual circumstances, or were they unlucky? Or are we just saying he died like all other people do? I'm not going to read into that too closely. Okay.
By his son, Henry VIII. Henry VIII contributed to the expansion of English holdings by incorporating Wales into the Kingdom of England and giving it representation in Parliament.
Well, that's interesting that he phrases it like that. Because, as I understand now, the United Kingdom, you have England, but you have Wales, and Wales is kind of its own entity. Scotland is its own entity. Ireland is its own entity. But the way he phrased it here was Wales became part of England. So I don't know if that was on purpose, specifically because that happened, or if he meant to say under English rule. Because that's kind of a big distinction.
In 1534, Henry split with Rome, creating the Church of England, which would begin the religious divide between England and Ireland. 8 years later, he had himself declared the King of Ireland, although in reality this didn't change very much.
So he just declared himself the King of Ireland? Is that how it works? I declare! Can I declare myself that? No, I don't. I'm not even going to go there. Ireland, you are free to do whatever you please. I am not your king. Although apparently King Henry VIII did declare himself the King of Ireland. Although they may not have acknowledged it? Is that what we're kind of saying here? They didn't really acknowledge that?
Henry was succeeded by Edward, and shortly after that came Queen Mary I, a Catholic, who married King Philip II of Spain. One important part of Mary's rule was the beginning of the Irish plantations, which saw lands belonging to Irish lords confiscated and given to the English for settlement. Mary and Philippe never...
Well, now it's, that's kind of England imposing itself in a very real way into Ireland. So I don't think Ireland at this point can really say, oh, we're just ignoring... You're not really the king. I mean, you can be the king in name, but apparently England is seizing land for plantations physically in Ireland at this point.
Had children, and so after Mary's death in 1558, the crown passed to her sister Elizabeth because the English Parliament made sure Philippe was ineligible. Elizabeth was a devout Protestant and reinstated many of her father's laws which punished Catholics.
I have heard of Queen Elizabeth. I don't know if it's Queen Elizabeth I. A lot of these queens and kings, at least to Americans, they sound like they all have the same name. There's a King James, John, maybe not. Maybe now that I'm forced to actually think about it, Queen Elizabeth, Queen Mary. Seems like they just all had those four names. That's a gross oversimplification, I know. But when I think of Queen Elizabeth, I do recognize that name. And that definitely was discussed in American education, but were there not many Queen Elizabeths? So I feel like I'm probably overlapping that a lot.
Much to the anger of Philippe, who saw himself as the defender of Catholicism. Spain held the Netherlands at this point, and the northern part, which had a large Protestant population, was rebelling against Spanish rule. England was more than happy to help undermine Spain's power, and one way the English helped the Dutch was by giving Dutch privateers shelter in English ports. So privateers were essentially pirates who had the protection of a government, and Elizabeth employed many. Spain had a growing...
Oh, so we're just hiring pirates now. I'm sure back in this day, everybody was hiring mercenaries and working with pirates and, you know, working with them to take over these guys and da-da-da. Although I know vaguely that the British Empire, seemingly, I mean, it expanded all over the globe. I mean, I don't truly claim to understand all of that history, but I do understand that the power of the UK dynasty, kingdom, the UK kingdom, United Kingdom, sure, we'll go with that, was very far-reaching, very, very, very far-reaching, very powerful. So it makes sense here.
Colonial empire at this point, and there was a lot of trade. Elizabeth employed many. Spain had a growing colonial empire at this point, and there was a lot of trade, particularly in silver, between Spain and its colonies. Privateers would seize this cargo by raiding Spanish ports and ships before taking it back to England.
I didn't know that Spain had a deep sort of historical connection with England or Great Britain. I didn't know that at all. I didn't know they had any relationship during the course of history.
The most famous of England's privateers is Sir Francis Drake, who conducted numerous highly profitable raids against the Spanish. He also circumnavigated the globe and...
I've heard of him. That name, I've heard that name. We're starting to touch on some topics here where at least some of these figures and some of these events were brought up during American history. It's just, I'm sorry, but that was more than a decade of just in a classroom with dim lighting, hearing countless historical things. So it's nothing specific against the British Empire. I don't remember 95% of my history lessons, unfortunately.
And even claimed land in what is now California. Beyond privateers, England also sent explorers to the New World, such as Sir Walter Raleigh, who set up a soon-to-be mysteriously abandoned colony at Roanoke Island in North America. Elizabeth also continued the Irish plantations to shore up the English position there. Exploration and colonisation at this time was almost always reliant on royal patronage in order to get funded. English-Spanish relations were not improved by England's moves across the Atlantic, since Spain claimed nearly all of the New World, and also losing silver was presumably not much fun for Philippe either.
It does seem like the British Empire has always had wealth and power, which it was a great tool that it used to influence lots of other nations. It was in the best benefit of many other nations. Sounds like Spain, and I know what would be Canada, and all sorts of other parts of the world. It was in their interest to work with Great Britain because it was such a valuable asset to have the British Empire on your side. So I could be totally wrong here, but that is something that is becoming more and more apparent to me. That was ridiculously impactful on the world, shaping the world. Everyone wanted to be friends with Great Britain.
Relations worsened when Portugal, England's oldest ally, had a succession crisis which saw Philippe crowned its king. The final straw for Philippe was when Elizabeth had Mary, the Queen of Scots, beheaded in 1587. The reasons for this...
I don't know why I've heard the name Mary, Queen of Scots, but maybe it's just because a lot of TV shows have her, or it's just a cool name. But I've heard that name... Of all the names I've heard in this video, Mary Queen of Scots sticks out to me. I couldn't tell you one thing about her, but I know her name. It's burned into my memory. I don't know why.
It's a complex, but it was essentially because Elizabeth did not want Scotland returning to Catholicism.
And apparently she was beheaded by Queen Elizabeth. Dang.
So Philippe, now pretty fed up, ordered the creation of an armada which was to sail to the Netherlands before invading England. When the armada reached England, several skirmishes occurred, the most famous being the Battle of the Gravelines, where an English victory forced the Spanish fleet to sail around the British Isles in order to return to Spain.
Wow. I was gonna say, you don't just casually sail your fleet up to England like nothing's gonna happen. So they were totally and utterly defeated and even had to sail around the entire British Isles to properly retreat. Wow.
Where an English victory forced the Spanish fleet to sail around the British Isles in order to return to Spain. Storms, a lack of food and disease killed thousands on the return journey, and this failure pretty much bankrupted Spain. The next year, England chose to counterattack and launched the English Armada under the command of Sir Francis Drake.
I had no idea that I've heard of Sir Francis Drake, by the way. We're getting a bunch of names that I know. I know these names, I just don't know the historical significance. So, sadly, that kind of tells you the effectiveness of at least the United States history education. It's very focused on memorizing names of events and names of people. But you don't recall the important parts, like what they did and what happened, which is really all that matters. So I feel like we could shift to focus more on the big bullet points, the big points of events happening in history, maybe some people here and there. It is important to know the historical figures, but I don't know. Maybe there's no good solution. Maybe the solution is just actually pay attention during history class. Okay. But yeah, I didn't know that England actually started counterattacking Spain at this point. Very interesting.
The goals of the Armada were to destroy the remaining Spanish ships, stir revolt in Portugal, and intercept any Spanish silver. Yeah. So, the English Armada was a complete failure and cost the lives of thousands of English sailors and was very expensive.
Oh, it was a complete failure. Wow. Why? Why?
It did, however, guarantee that England would remain independent. Towards the end of her reign, Elizabeth made one last contribution to...
So it failed, but it kind of was enough. It's like standing up to someone at school or something, where even if you lose the battle, you make a point that you're gonna fight back. So England made the point that they're ready to fight this out with Spain. So at that point, it seemed like neither Spain or England wanted much more to do with each other, and they were both going to remain independent. Something like that.
To the empire and founded the East India Company. Towards the end of her reign, Elizabeth made one last contribution to the empire and founded the East India Company, which was given a monopoly on trade with India.
Okay, I can see why Queen Elizabeth is so famous. And I'm not sure I'm talking about the right Queen Elizabeth, but this Queen Elizabeth the First, I believe, I understand it. She did a ton. A ton. Okay.
Elizabeth died childless in 1603 and was succeeded by James VI of Scotland, who was crowned James I of England. James's early reign saw the end of the war with Spain and was marked by several...
Wait, of Scotland?
India. Elizabeth died childless in 1603 and was succeeded by James VI of Scotland, who was...
Is that very common? For in the British Empire, since it is comprised of Scotland and Wales and England, for the monarch to come from any of these places? Because it always seems like the ones I'm familiar with come from England. But here we just have James, King James from Scotland, like it's no big deal, it's just a normal thing. So that is something I definitely don't know much about.
Was crowned James I of England. James's early reign saw the end of the war with Spain and was marked by several attempts to kill him, most notably the Gunpowder Plot. James contributed to the...
I've heard of the Gunpowder Plot as well. No details. I assume they tried to kill him with gunpowder by shoving the gunpowder down his throat to suffocate him. No, that is absolutely not what they did with, not what they tried to do with the gunpowder. Probably tried to blow it up.
The empire by sponsoring colonial ventures. He sponsored another wave of plantations in Ireland, most notably the Ulster plantation, which contained many Scottish settlers alongside English ones.
If all these Scots and English folk were all in all these plantations in Ireland 400 years ago, at some point they had, all of that had to be kind of moved back out and the nations become more independent again, because I know that's just Ireland, not Northern Ireland, but I forget the official name, but that is definitely not part of Scotland and England in the year 2022.
James also oversaw the first permanent English settlement in the Americas, the colony at Jamestown. Next was Bermuda, followed by Plymouth, which was famously founded by the Puritans who arrived on the Mayflower. So Jamestown was founded by the Virginia Company of London.
The first triflings of America. Wow. Woohoo!
Founded by the Puritans who arrived on the Mayflower. So Jamestown was founded by the Virginia Company of London with the goal of making its shareholders a profit. The colony was famously led by John Smith, who maintained good relations with the Native Americans.
John Smith
was forced to return to England after being injured in a gunpowder explosion, and for a time relations between the English and the natives remained peaceful. These good relations wouldn't last, and soon the English and natives were fighting, and after several wars the English managed to push the natives out of the area.
Yeah, that's more of the side of history that I'm familiar with. It's pretty commonly recognized that in American history, that the Native Americans, the people who were indigenous to America, living there before any semblance of American life showed up, that we did them very dirty. We did them rotten. We had unspeakable, crimes against them, killing them, pushing them out of their own land, horrible stuff. So that's kind of what this is talking about.
In order to grow the cash crops on which the colony relied, indentured servants were imported. In this context, indentured servants were people who sold themselves into a form of servitude for a period in order to pay for their voyage to the New World.
Wow, I didn't know about that. I'm sure they sold themselves into service out of desperation, out of survival, not out of, I can just make a quick buck. I can make a few pounds, a few dollars here and there. No, it was for survival, to get out of debt or buy, not good.
Indentured servants were soon replaced with slaves from Africa, since there was no obligation to free them and they were easier to obtain. Indian raids against the colony and rebellions against neglectful rule.
Yeah, very horrible stuff. And the beginning of slavery in America.
Them, and they were easier to obtain. Indian raids against the colony and rebellions against neglectful rule made it very difficult to make a profit, and the colony was turned over to the English crown. There were many reasons for colonial expansion. There was a strong desire to proselytize and convert the natives of the New World, which many believed would civilize them. Some undertook extremely expensive voyages of discovery, but the most common reason was money. Spain and
Some things never change. The number one motivator, the number one contributing factor to getting things done. Still the same today. Money! Money, 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 money. Oh no, I'm gonna... YouTube is gonna take down this video if the robots capture that soundbite there and think I'm stealing from a song or something. Was I that accurate? Okay, I need... Back to the video.
Portugal had amassed huge wealth trading with their colonies in China, and England didn't need much convincing. Cash crops such as tobacco and sugar were extremely profitable, and even more money could be made on the return voyages via the sale of slaves to the New World, the Atlantic Triangle as it's known. Another reason was security. The money from trade, as well as large overseas populations loyal to the crown, provided extra manpower and money for wars. To support the slave trade, England established forts along the coast of Africa from which they operated, trading goods for gold, ivory, and people.
I didn't know that. I didn't know any about that. Not that we're taught too much about the historical details of exactly how the slavery network was set up. But it is such a horrible thing to think about, and yet important thing to acknowledge and learn about, you know? It is history. It did happen.
Slaves from Africa were also much easier to obtain than the indentured servants which came from England, Ireland or Scotland. This was because of the numerous major upheavals across the British Isles, such as the English Civil War, which saw the British Isles briefly become a republic under Oliver Cromwell.
English Civil War? That probably deserves its own video. There was an English Civil War, like America had a Civil War. Seems like everyone had a Civil War. Civil Wars are pretty interesting. And, you know, war is horrible and all that. I don't want to be too nonchalant, but it does sound fascinating.
The Irish capitalised on a weakened English state and broke away from English rule.
Ah, just like that, we answer my question. My burning question.
For Cromwell.
When did Ireland break apart from English rule? And it was during the English Civil War. Makes complete sense. Wow, history is so fun.
The Irish capitalised on a weakened English state and broke away from English rule.
Okay.
Cromwell brutally and swiftly put down these rebellions and seized huge chunks of land and gave it to his veterans. During the Civil War...
Wait, what? What happened here?
The Irish capitalised on a weakened English state and broke away from English rule. Cromwell brutally and swiftly put down these rebellions and seized huge chunks of land and gave it to his veterans. During the Civil War, the colonies generally sided with the monarchy, leading the English Commonwealth to blockade some of them. Cromwell briefly went to war with Spain, who ceded Jamaica, which would form the backbone of England's sugar and slave trades. So long story short, Cromwell died and the monarchy was restored under Charles II, who
that's a... I don't know what the quote is, but it's something like, people don't change, people just die. Like, that's a perfect example of what happened here. Cromwell, who was causing all of this craziness to happen, it all just was put to an end like that because he died. It's not because he changed his mind or something was going to happen. Sometimes you just have to wait for the ruler to die, and then things will change. That's just how history goes.
So long story short, Cromwell died and the monarchy was restored under Charles II, who in terms of empire managed to gain New Amsterdam from the Dutch, which was swiftly renamed to New York. The monarchy would soon find itself in trouble again when Charles's son, James II, converted to Catholicism. Protestant England was none too pleased about this, and so some lords asked the Dutch William of Orange to become King of England, which he
William of Orange.
He did in 1688. William's ascendancy to the throne caused a major French-supported uprising in Ireland, which was eventually quashed. Scotland also tried its hand at colonisation during the period by founding Nova Scotia in modern-day Canada, which was quickly lost to the French. The most notorious attempt at Scotland...
Oh my gosh. There's a lot going on here. But I am pretty sure we just had the first sort of formations of what would be Canada.
Scottish Empire building was the founding of the colony at Caledonia in what is now Panama in 1698, which was claimed by Spain.
This is what I'm talking about, the English UK reach. I had no idea that it had such a far-reaching influence on all these little parts of the world. I had no idea. Man, the UK history lessons, or the British history lessons, during school. What are those like? There's so much stuff to know. So much happened. My goodness.
The colony at Caledonia in what is now Panama in 1698, which...
It's way easier when you were, when you don't have too much history. For America, we can just kind of pretend nothing happened before... we can just pretend nothing happened before the independence of America from Britain. So that makes it super easy on us for our history.
Which was claimed by Spain. The colony failed due to disease and a Spanish blockade, and the English refused to help because they didn't want to provoke war. What makes Caledonia so notable was the cost of its failure, since the venture had cost Scotland almost a fifth of its national wealth and bankrupted the kingdom. Thus, the Scottish and English empires at the turn of the 18th century looked like this. In return for England financing Scotland's debts, both kingdoms were unified by the 1707 Act of Union, which gave birth to Great Britain.
Look at this beautiful combination of the flags. You just have to admire it, by the way.
Kingdoms were unified by the 1707 Act of Union, which gave birth to Great Britain. Great Britain immediately found itself caught up in numerous European wars, from the War of the Spanish Succession.
So Great Britain has been around for about 300 years. I'm sorry, what was that date, actually? Yeah, 1700s. I think this whole story began in the 1600s. Am I correct on that? Or was it the 1400s? Probably the 1400s. Okay.
Both kingdoms were unified by the 1707 Act of Union, which gave birth to Great Britain. Great Britain immediately found itself caught up in numerous European wars. From the War of the Spanish Succession, Britain gained Gibraltar in southern Spain and large swathes of French territory in Canada. Next came the War of the Austrian Succession, which wasn't very important to empire, except that it paved the way for a much more important war, the 7 Years' War.
Austria? War with Austria? I never knew Austria was involved.
The 7 Years' War was a global conflict which saw British victory and saw the transfer of a great deal of North American territory to Britain from France and Spain.
7 Years' War. I've heard of it. Once again, I do feel like this is something we talked about in a little more detail in American education, and probably it was me personally who wasn't paying enough attention. Since this did, have something to do with North America.
Victory and saw the transfer of a great deal of North American territory to Britain from France and Spain. It should be noted here that for many of these countries, the wars were nothing more than excuses to seize each other's territories. The war also spread to India, where the British and French were trying to squeeze each other out. The reason for this was that trade with India was incredibly lucrative. It focused mainly on textiles, spices, and the most important consumer good of all time, tea. So by the beginning...
Tea! It's not a joke. That was actually a really important commodity in trade with India and Great Britain. I'm certainly aware of that. It's just kind of funny to think about because tea, I don't know what people living in the UK or Great Britain think about tea. If it's, a national drink, you could even call it. If you have a national whatever, a national bird, a national flag, you can have a national drink, right? Americans would call it tea for the UK. I don't know what the UK would call America's national drink. Coca-Cola would probably be correct. But Americans really don't think about tea. We don't have a lot of tea. It's not common. Some people drink tea. But, yeah. So, it's interesting how important it was in trade, whereas in America it wasn't substantial whatsoever.
Beginning of the 7 Years' War, the East India Company had already established factories along the coastline of India, much of which was controlled by either the Mughal or Maratha empires. The company was largely independent and even had its own military. The company was also deeply involved in Indian politics and were very good at playing Indian lords, called Nawabs, off of each other for British benefit.
Okay.
Robert Clive, also known as Clive of India, led the East India Company forces there. The British won a decisive victory against the Indians at the Battle of Plassey, mostly due to some double dealing.
Wow. Yeah, this whole history with India now. Had no idea. This is the third nation that I've heard so far in the course of this video that I had zero concept of. having any kind of relation or war or meaningful discourse with the British Empire. Had no idea.
After defeating the French, the Dutch, and later the Mughals, British territory in India looked like this. Bengal was particularly important since it had a taxable population twice the size of Britain. After the wars, the company began to levy heavy taxes against the locals, and Bengal quickly became an extremely important revenue stream for Britain. Robert Clive was for a short period the governor of Bengal, and one of his policies was to force local farmers to grow opium for export to China instead of food, which meant that whenever crops failed, large numbers of Bengali people starved. Britain's colonial successes in India were contrasted.
I mean, this explains why a lot of countries, I've noticed, have the Union Jack symbol on parts of their flag. It's because the British Empire was so global in all these little spots around the globe. I mean, who knew? Brits probably knew. We're probably very aware, but Americans are not aware of this at all. It's kind of shocking.
By its failings in North America. The number of soldiers, tax disputes, and lack of representation in the British Parliament led the 13 colonies to declare their independence. The Americans were led by General George Washington, who would later become the first president of the United States of America. Britain at first was able to win some major victories, but after years of attrition, alongside the French and Spanish aiding the Americans, the British accepted American independence and lost all of this territory.
So maybe that explains more about why the French and Spanish were so willing to help Americans during the Revolutionary War, as we call it. I never thought of it like that, through the lens of their history with the British Empire, but that makes a lot of sense, actually. And of course, we're getting into many more things here that I'm much more intimately familiar with. Intimately.
The birth of the British Empire was a slow and drawn-out process. The reasons for colonial expansion were diverse, ranging from religious calling to the desire for wealth. Colonial failure led to the creation of Great Britain, but colonial success meant that warfare now had a global scope, and it became increasingly difficult for the rest of the world to stay uninvolved from European politics.
Right.
I hope you enjoyed this.
Yeah, and gosh, with the British Empire expanding like that, all colonizing all over the earth, it makes sense that parts of them ended up breaking away or causing military conflicts there. It makes sense. You can only grow so big, I suppose. Anyway, that was a good video. History Matters. Very nice video. I award you a like. Thank you. That was fascinating. And very informative, to say the least. Yeah, I never thought about what came before Great Britain. Because it's already learning all these new things for me about the United Kingdom and the culture. And even, it wasn't that long ago before I learned what the difference between the UK and Great Britain and England were. So that's all overwhelming enough for me, for me to try to get a basic grasp on. So I never even realized till now there's a whole history out there that I'm not aware of. So I'm very glad to be much more informed now. I'm glad this video was, as the title says, a 10-minute history. I don't think I could have digested much more than that. And I'm sure there's little details here that I missed. But I think I have a much better understanding over, how the British Empire kind of started. And I'm sure there's more history that I'm missing after the American Revolution up until now. But this was good. This was very good for me. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed this reaction, feel free to give it a like or leave a comment. And if you're interested in more content like this, videos of me reacting, learning about the UK and its culture, history, news, events, places, please feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thank you for watching, and see you next time.